We are now at our fourth Acquisition Workforce Subcommittee of the GSA Acquisition Policy Federal Advisory Committee, the FAC. And so we just had a really great meeting last week, the full committee. And so we're getting ready to continue our subcommittee business today. We have, as we normally have done, we will record the meetings and we will continue to post our materials on the GAPFAC website under each of the subcommittees there. And so there'll be materials in terms of agendas, presentations, and everything that we share during the subcommittee meetings. Well, first I'm going to do is actually just kind of streamlining our roll call, since I can see who's here. So it looks like we got Clyde, we've got Steve, David, we got Daryl, we got Nicole. So I know a couple of folks are going to be running a little bit late, but we have also a guest speaker later on. So I wanted to go ahead and get us started here. And I'm just going to turn this over to Daryl and Nicole, just to kind of get us a rundown of what we're going to be doing here this afternoon.
Thanks, Boris. Could you show the agenda just so they can?
Sure, I will do that.
While he's doing this, I just want to thank the committee for your support and getting us prepared for the presentation last week. A special thanks to Nicole and Ann for jumping in and sharing in their summary of our meetings. You know, I should have said this ahead of time, and I apologize for putting you guys on the spot like that, but I do like others to kind of be part of the presentation. Sometimes you get tired of hearing the same voice all the time. So it's good when others can interject and quite frankly, you know, people who are even more knowledgeable on the subject matter than I am. I think it's really great. I want to ask the committee though, before we dive right into the agenda here, were there any comments or observations that you'd like to make in terms of the presentation and maybe something that we can do differently or better next time? And again, I'm welcome. I'm open to comments and questions and your observations.
Boris, just to let you know, we don't have the agenda showing on our screen. It's a calendar.
Oh, okay. So let me make sure.
Yeah, I was looking for it.
Yes, let me just try this again. Okay, here we go. How about now?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
Perfect. So go ahead.
I was just going to share something, Daryl. I think one thing that's really top of mind for me as a committee, and I'm hoping we have time to talk about it today with the team, is we really do need to hear voices from within FAI, other places where these trainings and educational exercises are moving forward. What you all don't know is behind the scenes, we've been trying to get individuals within these different spaces. It's just been difficult. So I'm hoping that we'll have some time to draw on your own networks to think through how we might tap the shoulders of individuals who could come and talk to us.
And I don't think it necessarily has to be a GSA employee. We might get some best practices or challenges from other acquisition workforce employees in other agencies. So please, your network is important here, and it would be useful to hear from various voices. I know one of the future meetings we'd like to have a panel of 2 or 3 professionals, you know, in the acquisition space, kind of talking about this and their challenges and procurement and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm even reaching out in my network. I think I got a few people I can call upon.
And Daryl, and I'm sorry, Daryl, this
Yes.
and Nicole, Boris might have a little information for you all too as well regarding the topic that you just mentioned.
That would be terrific. And I'm hoping that we dig into this when we start discussing the key priorities, because it's been tough trying to get individuals to talk when they're in the trenches, right? They haven't reached decisions, but I think this committee is moving fast enough that we need to be learning along with the other individuals who are in the trenches.
Okay, committee members, any other comments or thoughts on that, on the presentation? And not just our presentation as a committee, but what about the presentations from the other committees? Is there anything that we learned that that would be useful in our alignment with their work?
No, I would just say I think you guys did a great job, given the small amount of time you had to prepare for it. I think you did a great job. I also want to say the meeting that we had prior to the last meeting, I think we did you a disservice, because I think you and Nicole was trying to tell us, hey, look, all this other stuff you're talking about, that's good, but what we need from you right now is this agenda. Help us get this agenda done. I think we probably used more time than we should have used talking about other stuff, and we should have been helping you get the agenda done. So next time, say a little bit louder, a little bit harder, and make sure keep us focused the next time.
I will do.
And I think it's okay, Clyde, because we're going to focus you today.
Okay.
So before we wrap this up, I am going to put Kristen and Steve on the spot, because they are the chairs of the other two committees, and I feel like I finally got to hear from them in terms of what their committee, because I'm not involved in either committee, so I got to hear what they're doing. And Kristen, I just want to be sure that what you heard from us in terms of our priorities align with what you guys are thinking about and doing. I heard some things. I can't say in particular, but I think as we get to these priorities and our next steps, it'll be helpful to know that what we're doing resonates with your committee.
Hey, Daryl, I definitely want to hear Kristen's point, but one thing I wanted to mention, and I did want to mention real quickly, when we just going back to the question on speakers, so I wanted to let you know that we had conversations with Jeff Goses last week, and we're definitely lining up some people to talk to. So I wanted to lower the anxiety level a little bit. So we're bringing in, yeah. So we've got some ideas. He's got some pretty specific ideas that will help.
Thank you so much, because you've been CC'd on all of those conversations.
Yep. Gotcha. Gotcha. But I did want to let you know that the wheels are in motion for that. So back to you, Kristen.
Excellent.
Sure. Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, I think when you think about the industry partnership, where we're going, the first kind of area of focus is really about that engagement to expand. So I see that being somewhat independent of the work of the acquisition workforce. The second area around measures, motivations, and methods, I think there could be some connected tissue there as we move forward. I'm not sure where we're going to go in that area of focus yet. I mean, we have our meeting tomorrow, but I could definitely see where there could be some connected points there.
So, Kristen, in my world, and that's generally in airport consulting and development, the engagement is often handled by the procurement and acquisition staff. They're the ones who put on, they call it outreach, but I know we don't want to say outreach, but they're the ones who put on that program for the program managers or for the project managers. And so I see a real strong relationship between engagement and the acquisition folks. I see it in my industry. I don't, and it seems to work well. So just
Well,
some
interesting
food for thought.
perspective. That's helpful to me because I didn't really see a connected tissue there, but certainly open to conversation from others.
The program managers and those folks, they don't want to do outreach. They don't really want to do engagement or outreach. They just want to do the job. You know, the outreach and engagement tends to happen from either the procurement staff or the small business staff or some staff that's there just to do that work. They'll drag the project managers to it. And I've seen this in federal government too, particularly with the FAA. They'll drag the project managers and they'll talk about the project, but really it's the acquisition folks and the small business folks that put on any kind of outreach.
Well, it's probably a positive then that I sit on this subcommittee and Nicole sits on the industry partnership subcommittee. So I think that hopefully that can serve as a good conduit between the two.
Steve, any thoughts?
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I've said this only somewhat in jest before, but I think this committee is way ahead of us. And my biggest fear with the policy committee is it's big in terms of topical scope and it's broad in terms of diversity of membership. And I don't think we're anywhere close to congealing yet. Having said that, what we tried to communicate at the plenary was, I think, two things. And one, to Kristen's point, if our subcommittee ends up having to deal with all of the permutations of things related to small business in all of its forms and glories, we're sunk. So we just can't. And I think that unfortunately that means that Kristen and her team are going to have to dive pretty deep into, and again, I like the concept of dressing it up as engagement, but again, this is a pretty big voice in public procurement. My problem with drawing the line between workforce is when I was at the White House, we drew this nice clean line between policy and implementation, right? Let's get the policy and then we'll implement it, okay? The cynics among us said, there's no such thing as policy if you don't implement, and that means it's all workforce. So I don't see the clear division, but if I was trying to draw lines, it would be policy would talk about what or how, and then workforce is about making it possible. And I keep going back to that thing that Brennan talked about, making it stupid easy or whatever. It's turning it into playbooks and templates and the like. But to my point, I think the fundamental disconnect we have, and we heard a lot of this in the last couple of meetings, is until the big committee comes to grips with how little the acquisition workforce understands all this stuff, it doesn't make any difference what we do. And we're having this meeting with Jeff tomorrow, some of us, to talk about the pending FAR rule and why we're not going into that. But if the FAR Council promulgates a rule and nobody in the federal procurement workforce is following it, training on it, thinking about it, getting ready for it, you're promulgating a rule for things that'll be 3 to 5 years in the future, if at all. So I realize I'm just venting, but Daryl, you opened the door, and so I just kind of plowed through it. Anyway, thank you.
I think we have a real opportunity, Steve, though, when Holly Elwood comes on at 4 p.m. and Steve and Sylvan are going to join us. And we should be thinking about this, to ask some questions related to the EPA voice and the proposed FAR. It's my understanding that EPA and others have been having conversations about how to make it easy, mechanisms by which we could fast track decisions that will connect with policy, but also the federal acquisition workforce. So I think that this conversation is really good. to help tee up, my hope is, a very rich conversation in the next hour.
So just to add a couple things to that, and then I won't belabor things. I think one of the things that we want to make sure we understand from Holly is who and what she is and who and what she isn't. So
Yes.
I consider Holly one of the great champions in federal sustainable procurement. So for anybody who hasn't met her yet, she's on my superstar list. But her world is eco labels and ultimately goods. And so Daryl mentioned airports and infrastructure and services is really what the federal government buys. So these different food groups are a pretty big deal. So I think one of the things we need to be careful about is who's driving the train. And I think some of you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference where we had Betty Cremins and Holly together. And that was a really nice juxtaposition. Okay. All right. The only other thing I want to mention, I think some of you heard it, is Jeff Kozis has been speaking, I think, pretty intentionally about DAU, FAI, the core competencies and the fundamental skills. And I think the more I think about it, anything this subcommittee can do to be pushing that forward would be great. And one more thing before I forget, and maybe Boris or Stephanie, you can help us with this. On the FAI webpage, they now have the link to that course we heard about before, the Introduction for Program Managers on Sustainable Procurement, or whatever it's called. I know that I can backdoor my way into it because I've been doing it for years, but it would be great if you all could get the whole committee permission to view that course. So, I mean, I'd rather get into it appropriately, but more importantly, I think everybody wants access. Anyway, thanks so much.
Steve, I tried to
Great.
get in, I could not.
No, that's actually it's a great idea, and
It's a
definitely.
great idea.
Jeff Birch, who works for Jeff Kozis. So
I
Jeff
see
Birch is
Stephanie laughing at me though. I see her. I see her.
She
Trying to
tries
cover her
hard.
mouth.
She tries hard to keep her reactions close.
No, but we got it. No, well noted. Yeah, definitely we'll broach that. But yeah, definitely everything that you guys are talking about here, you're spot on, Steve, when it comes to the thoughts that Jeff has shared with us in terms of credentialing. When it looks like David Malone has his hands up.
Yeah, here I go again. So the one thing I don't want us to lose sight of, whatever we do and whatever we come up with, is the fact that the acquisition staff generally represents 1% to 2% of the population that they serve, right? And so a lot is expected of acquisition people when it comes to whether the issue is equity or sustainability. These are outside of the interest for many of the thousands of people that the acquisition workforce support. What they want are things and services, right? So it's funny because I was sitting here almost chuckling as I heard the word policy, because my experience in the public sector and in some cases in the private sector is that we write all these policies and then hundreds of people figure out ways to get around the policy. Like that's what they do every day, is figure out how do I get around this new thing, this new requirement that's put in front of me. I just led an effort to create a supplier diversity program for the city of St. Petersburg. And in my last 3 presentations to City Council, I was clear. The program is not going to make the difference. The policy is not going to make the difference because people find a way around these things. The things that's going to make the difference is changing the culture. So they probably got really sick of me talking about culture and how culture affects change. But the one thing I pointed out was when senior leaders ask questions about things like equity and sustainability, staff begins to understand that it's important to the senior leaders. So they have to be questioning those things, right? In order for there to be any real result. My only point is whatever we do, let's not forget to help the acquisition workforce, which is a very small percentage of the workforce that they support, tell the story. They have to be able to tell the story of why it's important, what's happening now as it relates to sustainability, what's not happening and what's broken, what needs to be done to fix it, and what does the world look like when it's fixed, right? If they can't tell that story, we can put all the policies that we want in place, and thousands of people are going to be figuring out how to get around them.
Daryl, you're on mute.
Yes, that's something we struggle with even in my own firm with policies, and I'm reminded daily that, you know, it's just a framework. You know, we have to do business. So sometimes we have to go around the policy, or we have to do this and so on and so forth. So I definitely hear your point. But I want to zero in on something that you said about the acquisition workforce being responsible for equity and inclusion and procurement. I think that's a real concern, because they are expected to do things to reach out to the small business world, and they are expected to do this along with procuring whatever else it needs to be procured. So that's, and I believe the project managers and the directors put that on them, and at the end of the day say, hey, that's y'all's responsibility. You're supposed to get me, you know, the pool of candidates. You're supposed to get me the products that I need. You're supposed to get me, you know, X, Y, and Z. That's not my job. So I don't know how we address that. I get the sense from the conversation from the other committees at our meeting that we are trying to be comprehensive, you know, that we're interested in figuring out how to support small business, make sure they're not left out of this arena. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to fall on the acquisition workforce to address those concerns. And maybe, Kristen, that's something that you and your committee they should be conscious of, because I heard a lot in your committee about, you know, engagement and inclusion and equity and all. But and all that stuff is important, and I support it all. But, you know, we're putting that on I think that's going to be put on the acquisition workforce to try to solve. So, given the time,
could I, yeah, just on that. So I think, you know, one of the things we heard loud and clear from some of the speakers that spoke to our team was that they're having a hard time even knowing where to reach out to, who to talk to, even though we know that the small and targeted area businesses is a big part of procurement. It's still not like those solid pipes that you have with large industry. And so the inability to reach out is the first step that, you know, that you will lead to a lack of strong engagement, right? Because we need to make sure we're reaching the right folks. So I guess the way I was looking at it, and again, we have our meeting tomorrow, was a little bit higher level, but, you know, this conversation is certainly eye-opening around that. I liked what David said, though, about the story. I keep thinking of Hamilton, like, who's going to tell your story? But, you know, part of this is the compelling story. And I think that will hold true for the acquisition workforce and for the industry engagement. So there is a common thread there, I think, which is interesting. I've made a note of that.
So I see Stephen's hand up, but I want to remind us that we have two priorities that we're advancing. One relates to the core competencies and ensuring that the acquisition workforce is level set, that they have core competencies in place. And then the second relates to the critical levers that we can pull to create that culture shift. So we're on target, we're on spot. I want to, I think we should bring Stephen, and then I'm hoping we can go back to the Jam board where we can look at these priorities and then push them a little bit further.
Sure, Steve.
I can wait.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Then let's do it. So, Nicole, I was thinking you know, maybe we just take one at a time. You know, maybe we use today's session to focus on just one of the priorities, because and begin to dissect it and figure out where we want to go with it. That'll help us, you know, instead of trying to tackle both of them at the same time. I think that'll help us with the second one when we get ready to do that, maybe at our next meeting.
I think that's fine. I think that's great. We only have 30 minutes before our guest speakers arrive, so I think that's a good use of our time. So remember, our first priority is to identify the essential pathways needed to make environmental and sustainability concerns a core competency in federal acquisition. And we had a lot of traction, especially around two areas. We should better understand the training and resources already available to the workforce through DAU and FAI. And then second, we should learn more about other certification and core competencies to serve as a model for recommendations around environmental competencies. So let's spend some time talking about this. We and I think it was here, priority one. So we had talked about the different sorts of individuals that we wanted to assemble within this space to help us really get it, that understanding of what the core competency should look like, what's already happening, what the next steps should be. So why don't we spend a little bit of time within this space? Boris, I see you've come off mute.
Yeah, and Nicole, I was going to go back to the comment I made earlier. This is where the conversation we had with Jeff Kosas last week, where he's very interested in having a conversation, a deep conversation, more into the details with also Nick West. If you remember Nick West, actually he's Stephanie's boss. He came and spoke a couple minutes back. He's overseeing a lot of the development work, and then there's also somebody or VP. So we've got some people that will definitely be lining up to have a deep discussion on those very same topics, Jeff included. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. So there was also a conversation. So if the Nick West perspective, is this specifically about DAU and FAI, or is it moving into another space?
That one, and Stephanie, feel free to chime in here if you want to, but as far as I'm concerned, when Nick spoke, he was really talking a lot about what GSA is doing, which makes it particularly relevant here. So some of the things that GSA's acquisition workforce is doing. Yeah. He's got somebody, and is it Chris Collins? I'm trying to remember, Stephanie, the names of the other person that Jeff mentioned.
I can't remember right off, Boris. I would have to look in my notes.
Yeah, and then there's Joni Newhart, who is at OFPP and OMB, and then Joni's been working more at the enterprise-wide level, more at the federal level. So I think you'll get both perspectives, both GSA, yeah, Joni Newhart, and I know her from some other project that I have worked on before. So those are two specific folks, and then also I would add Jeff Kosas to that list as well.
Yeah, and I actually think in many ways it would be, I think many people will be surprised if we hear from Joni, because I'm pretty confident Joni's going to say that there's nothing out there for all intents and purposes on issues related to us. And I think she'll be pretty frank about that. Boris or Stephanie, remind me of the speaker we had pretty early on who's at FAI but used to be at DAU, the one who worked on that course.
Yeah, that's Jeff Birch.
Jeff Birch.
Okay.
Jeff Birch.
Right. So I thought that was important, but I just wanted to go back to the point that Boris was making a moment ago. I thought I heard pretty clearly from Jeff over the last couple of meetings that if we could get GSA moving on these issues, we should not wait for FAI, and we surely shouldn't be waiting for DAU. I mean, that's at least what I got from Jeff. I mean, I can't speak for anybody else, but that's what I heard pretty loud and clear.
Mm-hmm.
Did I spell his last name right here, Boris?
Koses.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What about this internal review of trainings and a migration to a new curriculum? Because it's happening now, I understand.
It is, and that's what you're going to learn from talking to definitely Nick and Jeff. Works for Jeff Kosas, but he's the director of FAI. Yeah.
Yeah, Nicole, Nick has a couple of brilliant individuals who are actually working on the credentials and things like that for the program that he could definitely ask to speak.
So you're definitely hitting where there is a lot of energy, and I think that's, again, as an outsider, you know, I'm the DFO, but looking at it, the thing I like about where you guys are going is you're hitting where there is energy right now, which is a good place to be.
But I also understand there's energy out at DOE right now. And with respect to sustainability and embedding sustainability. Is there something we could learn from what they're doing or what DOD is doing outside of GSA?
My computer was freezing, Nicole, when you were talking.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No worries at all. I was saying my understanding is there's a lot of activity happening within DOD and DOE right now with respect to thinking about embedding sustainability into procurement activities and to federal acquisition. Is there someone from other agencies that we should be looking towards to include?
Yeah, I would agree. And again, I think Jeff Birch will be the critical link to DAU because he partners and works with DAU. They have a board of directors, and I think they have governance body right now. So I think Jeff Birch will be a link to DAU. DOE, I'm not sure. That's one that we will need to explore. I'm not familiar where these people are. Maybe Joni Newhart would be the right one, just because she's at the I see a knee-jerk reaction about DOE means nuclear. Okay, I'm reading a Steve message here. But yeah, DOE, I'm not sure, but definitely with Jeff Birch, we'll be able to cover DAU. Unless, Stephanie, you have any thoughts on DOE? And I'm thinking because Joni Newhart is OMB, she may have that connection.
No, I don't have any thoughts, of course.
Okay.
I mean, any of the Ds, you know, would make sense if we could determine, as Nicole said, where there's energy to move on this issue. We're open. Boris, how would you suggest we go about trying to find that out? Would that be through FAI? Isn't that open to everyone?
So FAI, and Steve, maybe you can speak to that structure between FAI and DAU. So FAI is the civilian agencies, whereas DAU is the defense community. But Steve, maybe you can elaborate a little more.
So Boris is correct that the clear line is that DAU is for the defense, all the defense agencies, and FAI is intended for everybody else. The bigger part of the issue, though, is that DAU is very well funded and FAI quite simply isn't. DAU is a bricks and mortar monster based in Fort Belvoir with unlimited infrastructure and massive support. FAI is on a good day a skeletal organization that outsources everything. One of the things that I found interesting, if you look on FAI's webpage recently, they are adopting and embracing and offering more DAU content. You know, as an aside, there's a bizarre piece of history here, but a lot of the folks in my world, the gray hairs of federal procurement, we tried to get them all consolidated years ago because FAI has always been the weak sister here, but we failed because for turf reasons. The only other thing I'll mention on this, because this is a workforce committee, is a fair number of federal agencies who are not DoD agencies don't train their own people from the ground up. And in fact, one of the most common ways to develop professional expertise is to hire people that DoD has already recruited, trained, and driven through this the certification process. So you'll meet a lot of executives, particularly at the GS-15 level and up across the federal government, who got all their credibility and training at DoD, and then they move laterally to a civilian agency to get a promotion. So it's really a slightly pathological system.
Okay, so where are we?
So I can jump back to the priorities here that we've identified to better understand the training and resources already available. And I think we're on the path to getting there, right? Through these different speakers that we've identified. My hope is it's going to help us identify other individuals along the way to dig in a little bit deeper. But we also noted that we should learn more about other certifications or core competencies to serve as a model for recommendations around an environmental competency.
So I was wondering if there might be trade associations or industry partners who we might want to hear from on sustainability issues, and maybe what they're doing within their industries that supports certain core competencies. This has nothing to do in my mind about the procurement professional, although I know that's a separate issue. I'm thinking about the competencies of project managers understanding products, systems, and where that might be some alliance there with the procurement folks. If they don't understand each other, if they're not talking the same language, and if they're not moving in the same direction, then I don't see how this works. So I'm just throwing out there to see if there might be some other non-governmental entities that we might want to talk to. I'll put this out here. You know, as an architect, I am constantly looking at this from the perspective of materials, construction methods, so on and so forth, how you get things LEED certified, on and on and on. So, within that industry, there's been a ton of work done in the last 20 years to advance sustainability, and it's still moving at a very quick pace.
I think we also might want to open it up to the individuals who put their little green circles here. Because my recollection is that part of this conversation related to the fact that the current acquisition workforce has to go through a number of existing certifications, right? And this would be potentially layering another certification on top. And so thinking through what has worked particularly well about the approaches taken previously, how this might layer on, what that would look like in the existing framework. So we've said it many different ways. I think of it as competing priorities for the acquisition workforce professional, that they're wrestling with a lot of competing priorities related to low cost purchasing, related to product quality. We put in the small business component and other aspects. Now we're talking about climate change and broadening the number of competing priorities out there. So as we think about the core competencies that are needed in the certifications that will be needed for individuals to consider balancing these priorities, who should we be talking to? What would that look like? And again, I think it's worth inviting the individuals who put their green little circles on this sticky to speak up, and it'll be worth hearing from what you were thinking as you put your little green sticky there. David, you're clapping your hands. Hop
Oh,
on
I
in.
thought I had raised my hand.
Well, I'll take that too.
To Daryl's question earlier, I do a lot of work with the Institute for Supply Management. There is a set of core competencies that they use. They also conducted a sustainability study in 2021. Some of those resources are things that we may be able to bring to bear to kind of get to the question that was asked, that Daryl, that you were bringing up earlier.
You might want to shoot us the contact, or you can contact who you know there, and it's possible that we could bring them in as a guest speaker.
Yeah, I'll start by sending you the list of core competencies that they focus on, and then a link to the sustainability study. Does that make sense?
Let's start there.
Do we know anyone within the existing certifications that exist within GSA or elsewhere that build out these programs for us, Stephanie? Is there someone we could link to there?
Yes, Nicole, we could probably talk to Nick West as it relates to that.
Okay. Okay.
So it doesn't look like we have any additional.
It looks like Mark has an idea there. Mark, you want to talk about your idea on NASPO? Because I've heard that organization mentioned too. Actually, when we were just talking about setting up the committee, that name came up. You want to talk a little bit about NASPO?
Sure, Boris, thank you for that. NASPO, I was on a committee at NASPO when I was more active, and it's called the National Association of State Procurement Officials, and they really are the best practices for the states. And I think in terms of sustainability, they are probably, and I know I have at least one podcast on there and some other things, where they can participate either setting standards or helping guide us. And I just think that we should include them whenever we're thinking about those types of things so that we can weigh in.
Mark, do you have a contact at NASPO we should be talking to?
Lyndall Hatton was the president when I was there. I think he still is. I'd be happy to send you his information, and the website itself is pretty rich with information as well.
I probably have misspelled the name, but it's enough to keep us going. I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay, any other comments from the green dot people?
Just
Okay.
on that, on that thread, and if that's interesting, like, and is there a leading state that has found success? And, that might be another target.
Yeah, that's come up before, and Steve and I have both had the pleasure of hearing Julia Wolf talk at Massachusetts. I think they're head over heels above most states, or ahead of most states when it comes to thinking about sustainable procurement. And I have no doubt that getting to this conversation that we had earlier, and I think it was David or Clyde, I can't recall about, I think it was David, culture change. They had to wrestle with that. So learning from them how they manage that cultural shift. And I have no doubt it included training, but also things like incentives, or maybe you create competitions within the organization. You have to think about the different structures that are in place. And it would be, I think, really useful to learn how they thought about those structures.
So in the final 10 minutes here before our guest speaker joins us, I'm interested to hear how we want the end product to look like. Now, just bear with me. You know, I'm not ready to jump to the end, but I am interested to hear from you guys, because we've talked a lot about playbooks and stories, and you know, what is it that we're looking to provide? And maybe Boris and Stephanie, it might be helpful here if you guys could show us. Like, I want to understand: is it a set of recommendations? Is it some detail around connections with various associations? What is the expectation here?
So I'll talk to that a little bit. So we are looking for, so it's an advisory committee. So you're a subcommittee within the GAPFAC, the full. So when this work is complete and to your satisfaction, you're looking at recommendations that the GAPFAC will make to GSA. Those recommendations will come along with a structure that will make those actionable, if you will. So it's not like, I think you guys should develop a new course, and we've had this conversation before, but it's more, here's what the content is. Here's how we will make it a reality. Here's a game plan for how to actually make this viable, so that when you hand this over to GSA, not only are you giving them something, and by that time, you know, it's not going to be a mystery. So there's going to be lots of communication. It will be like, yes, this is wonderful. We now not only have recommendation, but a way to get there, a plan that goes along with it, and if you will, a structure. You're not going to actually implement it yourselves as a subcommittee or a full committee. It's not the role of the committee, but rather to provide the advice, if you will. Stephanie, you want to add any more to that? Just make sure that I'm clear.
No, I think you're spot on. It's almost like recommending a business plan or some sort. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Right. So it's well-informed recommendation, so that you know where it came from, but it's got a way of actually becoming alive. Yeah.
Great. I asked that because as we think through these priorities, I'd like for us to also think through potential recommendations. We don't have to get maybe that specific, but we need to start thinking about where would a recommendation take us if we're talking about a certain theme or category, and then what would it take to structure it so it could be implemented, and I think, or actionable by the full committee. And I'm assuming there's no limit on the number of recommendations. It's just open to us to determine as we move through the process.
Yeah, there's no limit. I would say this though, Daryl, that this is one of those things where not necessarily the number of recommendations, but just less is more, if you will. So when you're more focused, and if you're not giving GSA, 100 different recommendations, you're giving them very specific, small set of well-curated set of recommendations, I think that would be most helpful, not deliver a 400-page report. And that's not, I've heard that analogy a couple of times in talking through this. But yeah, there's no limit, but yet you do want to be very thoughtful and judicious on how you pull this together, so it's like simple, easy, and there's fewer things to really consider, hard-hitting things. That makes sense.
Okay.
There's a tactical question that's bouncing through my head right now. If we hear from Jeff Kosis, Nick West, Jeff Birch, this is like the GSA, DAU, FAI perspective. And then we could look to NASPO and state for best practices about how this stuff's getting implemented in different places, how they're creating the culture shifts. right? That's 2 sets of public meetings, right? So that would take us through the middle of February. At which point, I think we need to pivot and begin thinking about bringing in speakers around a different area, or it could be at the end of those 2 sets of discussions. That's when we bring together our panel, because we've talked many times about creating a focus group of individuals who are on the front lines to hear from them about some of their general concerns. I think, and part of my reason for bringing this up is that it takes a while to set these folks up. And so to get some general agreement from the committee that these would be our 2 primary target areas or our 3 primary target areas, the third being the focus group, then we can start hustling behind the scenes to make this happen.
Yeah, that one thing I would like to then Nicole in your tactics is you could also do subject matter expert discussion. So you don't necessarily have to have a full public meeting to bring a speaker. You set up a meeting and a couple of you and have a deep conversation with somebody about very specific things. So you can definitely do that without having to. So that would even give you a little more leverage. You have a few more tools at your disposal.
I am worried about time and ensuring that we get the input that we need to provide those highly contextual recommendations that you're looking for.
Yeah. But I just wanted to add that there. So we have other tools available. Yeah.
At the same time, and maybe we can do this during some of our administrative meetings, but I want everyone to be thinking about our product in April, or the presentation in April. It'll go quickly here, as we get through speakers and so forth. So I want us to start spending some time around how we can frame this. So when the next meeting, I believe, is April.
So we haven't set a date yet. So we're going to be looking at that. So that communication will be coming, looking either mid to late April.
Okay.
And then we'll definitely be setting that up.
Late April.
Late April, yes.
Give us a little more time.
And we have a spring break in there, so we definitely need to work around schedules, make sure that that'll work for people as well. So trying to navigate that as well.
Okay.
So before our guest speakers come, can we get some tacit approval around this idea? GSA, our next GSA, FAI, DAU, looking at states for best practices, and then potentially doing a focus group around acquisition workforce professionals and their needs being our pathway forward.
I like that structure, Nicole.
Okay. All right. Others?
I agree. Sorry, I couldn't get off mute fast enough. I think those are 3 real solid swim lanes to go down.
Let's see a thumbs up from Steve there. So I would recommend you have a couple minutes here before your speaker. If there are any public speakers, or this is anybody who is not a member of the subcommittee or DFO or deputy, this might be a good time to chime in. But I'll turn it back to you, Nicole and Daryl.
Hi, Troy.
This is Troy. Hi, I've been advised to kind of participate as an observer, as if I'm kind of a public participant. And I would just throw into the mix of the GSA experts you're going to hear from. I think it'd be great to hear from Joni Newhart at OFPP. She's a real treasure in this area of looking across the landscape of educating the acquisition workforce. So I just recommend adding her in to that tranche of experts you hear from.
She's on our list, Troy. We got her.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
And Troy, did you have any other comments related to the last week's meeting, or I mean, it'd be great to hear from you, if just to know that we're going in the right direction and that
Yeah, well, absolutely. And just for if anyone wasn't on the public meeting we had last week, I just want to say, first, tremendous thanks to all the subcommittees, especially the subcommittee chairs, co-chairs. You're putting in a lot of hours, and it's all coming to fruition here. I think I feel like each subcommittee is down a path towards identifying their mission. I think you're a little ahead of the other subcommittees in that we voted on your mission and 2 top priorities at the last meeting, which is great. And I feel like everyone is swimming in the same direction, and that we're, we're on track for April for getting teed up. I think some early wins. Wait, Steve, what do you? I don't understand your comment, Steve.
Oh, no, I
I'm
just
giving
thought
you a compliment.
I just thought you were finishing on the other committee. I didn't go.
Well,
sorry.
yeah, we voted on this one, and you're close. You're close. But yeah, I just again, tremendous thanks. I think that everyone's covered a lot of ground in a really short amount of time, and we've learned a lot. And so I'm just really optimistic heading into the meeting in late April. Our goal always has been, let's try to tee up some early wins so that we keep the ball moving forward. We know that there are a lot of more difficult issues to take on where the recommendations will be further reaching. But I just feel really great about where everyone has been. And so just want to thank you all.
Excellent. I see that our guest speaker has joined. Nicole, I assume you're going to introduce her.
Yeah, I'm happy to. We have a couple. We have Holly Elwood, who's a senior advisor at EPA. She has extensive experience in sustainable purchasing and assisting federal agencies and thinking about how environment should be embedded within acquisition decisions. She's also one of the architects for the construction of EPA's recommendations of standards and eco-labels for use, and was involved in the language to help construct the proposed FAR rule. So I want to welcome Holly, but I also want to introduce Stephen as well, because he's going to be partnering with her in today's presentation. Stephen also at EPA is a sustainable products and purchasing team leader. He has this really strong track record developing, managing, and scaling sustainable products and procurement initiatives that have impact not just within the agency, but across the federal government. So I am just deeply grateful that they both were able to figure out how to fast track presentations to come and talk with us today. Stephen's going to talk specifically about the EPA's developments related to the new sustainability check program. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass the baton to both of you.
So I saw a note from Holly that we need to unmute her.
Yes, Skylar, do we need to do anything, or is this something she can do?
She should be able to unmute herself. Let me check.
Okay. Stephen, can you unmute yourself?
I believe I have. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Great. Mhm.
Great.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen and get your presentation ready.
Another possibility, Holly, may be to log out and log back in if you're still having difficulties.
Yeah, I would go ahead and try that, because even when I press ask to unmute, it's not letting me. Okay, I think she logged out. We'll see if that works.
And I see Jenny join us as well. Hello, Jenny. She's a fellow GAPFAC member as well.
Here's Holly, and it looks like she's unmuted.
All right.
Oh, she's connecting to audio.
All right. Hey, Holly, we can see you.
And
And
can
we-
you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yay.
Yay, I
All
love it
right.
when technology works. Trying to get you guys down so I'm not looking up at you, but it looks like it's not moving. I got a new computer this morning, so I apologize all. First of all, thank you so much for inviting Stephen and I to come and speak to you today. And I'm so glad that Stephen, my colleague, can be here with me as well. We're looking forward to getting a chance to present some opportunities to all of you about what we might be able to do to advance federal sustainable procurement. And I just want to note that we're just talking about a couple of suggestions today. There are many opportunities I know you're delving into in this group, but we're just going to cover a few of some of the ones that we see as key challenges and opportunities. So next slide, please. This is me, and next slide. What we're going to cover today is I'll provide a very quick overview of the EPA's Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program that Stephen and I are a part of. And then we'll talk very briefly about what we see as the role for purchasers in ensuring federal sustainable procurement happens. And then we're going to outline 2 key challenges to successful federal sustainable procurement and 2 of the activities that one which is underway to try to help to solve one of these challenges, and then another that we think is ripe for an opportunity to further explore, possibly by this subcommittee. And then we'll have time for Q&A. So next slide, please. So in 1993, under President Clinton, through an executive order, EPA was directed to help federal agencies procure more sustainable products and services. And the goal and the intent was to really try to harness the power of the federal pocketbook to drive towards making a more sustainable marketplace for us all, because what we ask for in the federal government gets made not only for us, but for others around the globe. So we have a tremendous responsibility and an opportunity to really make a difference when we procure more sustainably. Next slide, please. Our program focuses on taking a life cycle multi-attribute approach to defining what environmentally preferable means. So we look at all of the key environmental impacts associated with the manufacture, with the use, and with the disposal of the products and the services that we utilize in the federal government. We help to engage in building product sustainability standards and service sustainability standards in areas of key high federal spend, where we have known significant environmental and public health impacts. And then we also assess and recommend private sector standards and eco-labels for use in federal purchasing. And we help feds to then buy products that meet those standards, and help small businesses to be able to sell those products and services to the federal government. And then lastly, we help to try to answer the so what question. So we bought a more sustainable product or service. What did it mean? What was the actual impact, or what kind of impact reductions were we able to achieve as a result of that sustainable procurement decision? Next slide, please. So this is a very rudimentary kind of overview of what we consider to be the role of purchasers in the federal government when we are working to procure our products and services that we need in order to meet our missions. So any purchaser, of course, first determines what they need to buy, and then they need to figure out how they're going to buy it. And they have, of course, a central role in making sure that we are going to procure more sustainably. So there's lots of different options available in terms of what they're going to buy and how they're going to buy. And depending on what's being purchased, they may decide to use a purchase card or a contract. They may use an existing contract or they may create a new contract. These contracts that they may use may be ones that were built and used by their program office within their agency or by their whole agency, or they may be managed by another agency, like a government-wide acquisition contract, or they may have been built by GSA. These contracts could be considered to be best in class, meaning that they help agencies to procure one or more of the top 10 goods and services used in the federal government. And they have been reviewed and determined to be in alignment with key USG indicators of excellence. And these are just kind of a few examples of the different mechanisms that we use in the federal government to buy products and services. And I want to make sure it's clear that these are not completely isolated and separate boxes. Some of our government-wide acquisition contracts could be considered and are considered to be best-in-class contracts. For example, you can use a purchase card to procure products through some of the offerings available on GSA schedules. So there's some fluidity between these boxes to be aware of. And we have over 500,000 vendors that supply us with goods and services today in the federal government. For all the paths that we choose, purchasers can ensure that we're procuring more sustainable products and services by conducting market research to determine which federal sustainable procurement requirements apply for that particular procurement or product or service. They can also determine if federal sustainable procurement requirements are included in the contracts that they are looking at using. If they're trying to use an existing contract, they can require in RFPs and task orders provision of compliant products and seek compliant products in online catalogs if they're using a purchase card and buying through any online catalogs. And then they can provide data on sustainable procurements made via the federal procurement data system, which is a way that we do a lot of tracking of our purchases. And ideally, they can require vendors to provide reports of compliant products that we may have bought through a vehicle with them to inform what kind of data we're going to put into FPDS. So next slide, please. So what's the problem? We have noticed in the work we've been doing for over 20 years now in the federal government on sustainable procurement that our key major existing contracts don't always include federal sustainable procurement requirements. And the RFPs that are issued currently usually don't include the federal sustainable procurement requirements. So we are interested in trying to address those two issues. And we've got a couple activities and research we've done we're going to share with you on both of those. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Sustainability Check Initiative is a really exciting effort that Stephen is leading for our team. And it is a really follow-up to work that he had started 5 or 6 years ago called Green Check. And it's being conducted as a partnership with Category Management Leadership Council. And we are working in collaboration very closely with CEQ and GSA and OMB's Office of Federal Procurement Policy on this effort. And we are the ones at EPA are doing most of the work internally to do the data crunching and the contract analysis work. And the goal of Sustainability Check is to ensure that all the master contract documents that are the priority best-in-class contracts used today in the federal government have maximum alignment with our federal sustainable purchasing requirements. And also that we're encouraging the best-in-class solution managers, which is what they're referred to as, to really think innovatively about sustainability and go beyond what's required right now in our sustainable purchasing requirements, to think about other ways that they may be able to encourage us to be procuring more sustainable products and services. Next slide, please. So this work is being driven by several existing FAR requirements and 2 fairly recent green executive orders. Executive Order 14057 and 14030 have specific directions to the federal government in terms of ensuring that we are procuring more sustainably. They direct us to minimize the risk of climate through procurement, to purchase sustainable products and services, and they actually expand the requirements we have to not just what's statutorily required, but to procuring products that meet our Water Sense program at EPA to buy more water efficient products, our Safer Choice program to ensure we're buying products containing safer chemicals, our Smart Way program to ensure we're buying vehicles and equipment for our vehicles that minimize impacts to the environment and that meet our recommendations of specification standards and eco labels in my program and Stephen's program. And we say here again, we use sustainable vehicles, delivery and shipping as well. Next slide, please. So we are currently in phase 1 of the Sustainability Check Initiative, and we're focused on 20 of the 37 best-in-class contracts that exist. And that group of contracts is referred to, the 37 is referred to Tier 3 in the federal community. And I have a slide right after this that gives you a pie chart for those people who need a visual, so it's coming. And the reason that we've decided to focus on these contracts is because they really do give us a real ripe opportunity to demonstrate innovation in the federal government and lead by example across the federal government, because what happens in best-in-class contracts can then trickle down and influence all the other contracts that are let throughout the federal government. And we have tried to focus on those where we see the highest opportunity for sustainability impacts to be able to be achieved. Once we're done with phase 1, which is reviewing the best-in-class contract language, determining how aligned the language is with the existing federal sustainable purchasing requirements, providing that information back to the best-in-class solution managers and working with them on putting a plan together on how they're going to maximize increased alignment, then we're going to shift to phase 2. And phase 2 is going to be to take a look at the Tier 2 contracts, which is where we have $80 billion in spending and 404 contracts. So it's a lot more work for not that much more dollars spend, which is another reason why we focused on VIX first. And then the Tier 1 contracts, which is 1,152 contracts today. And then phase 3, we're really hoping to get at some of these reporting needs and improve the data that is shared throughout the federal government on our compliance with meeting these requirements. And of course, throughout this whole process, we're encouraging innovation and people to really think beyond the requirements that exist today. And we've already seen that in some of the plans that the big solution managers have put out, that they have already been really thinking creatively about sustainability as a result, I think, in part of this conversation starting. Next slide, please. So here's the visual, which is a little blurry, sorry about that. But you can get a sense of the larger picture here. And it looks like for some reason in the translation, the numbers didn't come through, but I can walk you through this. So phase 1, the blue part of the pie is what we're focused on today and looking at 20 of the 37 best-in-class contracts. And then phase 2, we'll be looking at with the green and the silver slices of the pie. And the yellow slice is the rest of procurement of the $400 billion that's spent on these 10 commonly purchased goods and services across the federal government. So we have 630 billion to 650 billion, depending on which data set you look at, that we spent last year in federal purchases. Of that 630 to 650, 400 billion gets spent on these 10 commonly purchased goods and services, which is covered by the category management program. And then you can see how the breakout here and our focus area on phase 1, and then we'll be shifting to phase 2 in the near future. Next slide, please. So for the focus that we have now, we're looking at the best-in-class category management categories for IT, facilities and construction, industrial products and services, office management, professional services, and we were looking at transportation and logistics services, but just recently made a decision that we will probably not focus on that right now, but we'll look at that in phase 2 in a little more depth because of some of the complexity and some of the policy choices in that space. And we had told the best-in-class solution managers that we would like them to make a commitment to advance their alignment with the requirements by January 13th. But since this slide was created, we've needed a little bit more time to ensure that all of the review results were completely accurate. And we've been working closely with GSA's Federal Acquisition Service team to help us to iron out all of the various parts, clauses we've been reviewing. And we're seeing much increased compliance results through this rejiggering that we're doing right now. So we're hoping to issue our results very soon to the best-in-class solution managers, and then be able to set that path forward towards increased alignment with our sustainable purchasing requirements moving forward. Next slide, please. So Stephen, I believe we will hand it off to you at this point about what we've done so far and where we're headed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Holly. Can people hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Thumbs up. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you. And thank you, Holly, for setting this up. So as Holly said, we're in phase 1, and just this gives you just a sense as to some of the groundwork we had to do during this phase. For example, we had to first of all, make sure we are all aligned with the key players, the GSA, OMB, CEQ, and so forth, and build out a team. A key part of it was developing a review tool. That's a fancy term for just a spreadsheet that allows us to look at a particular best-in-class contract vehicle, the master contract, and check a whole slew of boxes. Does it have the right contract clauses for Energy Star, for EP, for hazardous materials management, for recycled content, that sort of thing? And, so you can check all the boxes and then see if that best-in-class contract vehicle does in fact fully comply or not with all the federal requirements. We drafted a contract, I call it copy and paste text. So for example, if a best-in-class contract vehicle is not meeting one or more of the sustainability requirements, doesn't have it in their master contract document, we've worked with OMB, CEQ, GSA on this copy-paste document so they could just easily copy and paste the right contract clauses into the master contract when they revisit those master contract documents in the future. And model contract language, if you will. And of course, the review process that has happened in waves, but we think we're very close to finalizing it after a few iterations. We're just working out a few remaining discrepancies between our review and GSA's review of these master contract documents. So let's see. And then we plan to issue sort of a progress report very soon to the CMLC, the Category Management Leadership Council, and to the whole category management community. Next slide, please. Okay, so how is this review being done? I will spare you the guts of this review spreadsheet, but this will show you the major ratings that we give each best-in-class contract vehicle. Pending review means that we haven't gotten to the review yet. Not yet compliant, additional action needed just means that we found at least one missing sustainability clause, sustainability requirement in the master contract. Commitment made, is the next step up, which means, well, okay, we found some missing contract clauses, sustainability references and so forth, but the BIC manager, the owner of that best-in-class contract vehicle has sent an email to us, OMB and CEQ, saying, we understand that we're missing a few, one or more references, but we're committed to updating our master contract during the next, the next time the contract document is going to be updated. And then sustainability check is the ultimate rating, which means all the requirements have been found in the master contract review. We now are up to 3 of them, 3 of the 20 or so. Holly kept referring to 20. It's down to actually 19. A little update there. 19 high priority BICs. 3 of those 19 have, received that sustainability check rating as of now. Next slide. So this is just a kind of a report card, if you will, a mock-up of the report card that we'll be giving the CMLC, showing how these best-in-class contract vehicles have done in terms of the sustainability check review. Next slide. And this is the more detailed report card. It breaks it down by actual BIC. So you see that there are quite a few BICs in the IT category, 12 of them. And so you'd be able to see how they were reviewed BIC by BIC as opposed to category by category. Next slide. And this is just a continuation of the same more detailed report card, if you will. Again, BIC by BIC. Next slide. And I think I passed the baton back to Holly.
Yeah, so we can do this in one of 2 ways. And I'll look to Nicole, your thoughts on this. I mean, we could either do Q&A right now on this part and then move to the next opportunity, or I can go through the next opportunity and then we can do Q&A. What do you prefer? Oh, cannot hear you, Nicole.
Nicole, you're
Yeah, I was saying, I think you just keep going.
Okay, great. All right, so this is the second opportunity area, and this is not as far along as the first that we shared. So this is where I think we really could use some wisdom and some guidance from this committee on what makes the most sense as far as where to put attention for the federal government and where the opportunity seems ripest. So really looking forward to input on this. Okay, so what we have found is that there's several required sustainable procurement clauses, which vary by product and service. And I put a couple slides in here to give you what those contract clauses are, just a summary title for each, so you could have a sense of that for those who haven't seen that before. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you'll see them and have them in this deck. Then there's a selection of applicable clauses that are currently left to RFP writers, that, picking which ones apply to which products and services as you're writing your RFP. And it's really time consuming for the folks putting the RFPs together. And they are often consumed with so many other activities that they really don't have the time to become experts on all of this. And so often mistakes are made, understandably. Also, we just know that from data from FEMP that I'll show you in a second, the Federal Energy Management Program, that there's very low compliance rates with our sustainable procurement requirements getting incorporated into our RFPs effectively. And the contracts writing systems that we have right now are not helping to solve this problem, but they could. So next slide, please. Next slide. Here we go. So these are the clauses that I mentioned that exist today in the FAR related to sustainability. And there are many of them, and that's kind of the point of showing you these. And they vary by product and service in terms of what they apply to. And if we go to the next slide, there's also some new sustainability text that will apply and is being integrated into the FAR through FAR case 2021-015. Actually, that one and 2022-006. So this is coming in 2022-006. And then the next slide. This is also going to be addressed in that other FAR case. So we always, whenever there's a new executive order, we have a FAR case that will align the FAR with the new directives provided by the federal government, by the administration to federal purchasers. So you can see there's a lot, and that's a lot for purchasers to have to manage and be aware of and cognizant of as they put these RFPs together. Next slide, please. So the Federal Energy Management Program has for several years paid their contractor to take a look at RFPs that are put up on sam.gov and to evaluate and determine whether or not they actually incorporate the clauses that are required just related to whether or not a product meets the what's called FEMP designation for use, having low standby power as an option, and also Energy Star certification. And what they found is that there's today 70% compliance with the FEMP requirement and 67% requirement with the Energy Star requirement, which is up substantially from a couple of years ago, but still nowhere near 100%, which is really where we need to be. Next slide, please. So why do we want to consider how we can use contract writing systems here to simplify all of this? We really want to make purchasers' lives easier and all of the contracting officers across the federal government save resources in terms of time spent on putting RFPs together, of course, increase compliance, and then simplify and integrate this into standard practice. Next slide, please. So we believe that what the opportunity is that we'd like to explore further is to prioritize the most frequently used contract writing systems and then update them to automate addition of sustainable procurement clauses into our RFPs. And let's go to the next slide. So EPA did research on this topic and this opportunity back in 2015. And I managed that work, and we have a link to the research report that's in this slide deck at the end. So anyone who wants to dig in to see more details can do that. What we found was that 80% of federal agencies as of 2015, so there's a need to update the data and make sure that's still accurate, use PRISM, or sometimes it's called Stripes in the military space, as their contract writing system. And DOE has a PRISM user group for the federal space that allows all of the folks who are managing the agency's use of PRISM to get together on a regular basis, share information, and try to help each other to have best practice in terms of how they use these systems. This system, PRISM, has the capability to automate adding sustainable procurement requirements into their RFPs. We had conversations with CompuSearch, which manages PRISM, and they did confirm that they have the ability to do it today, as of 2015. So I'm sure their capabilities gotten better since then. GSA, in response to this research and the findings that we found, did then move to create an API that would allow facilitation of adding and automating the incorporation of sustainable procurement requirements into the contract writing system, PRISM system, and it could be used in any contract writing system across the federal government. And we worked with CompuSearch and with a few other contract writing system providers to make sure that that was true and that they could utilize that API within their systems. Next slide, please. So what's needed at this point? It would really be helpful to designate and to fund a federal agency to focus on this opportunity further and update the information that we have right now about the status of contract writing systems in the federal space, what's currently being used, today. We know that, NASA, for example, moved to an SAP software system, and that has more of a decision-making flexibility within that system. We don't know if other agencies have done that or not. Some of them are very constrained because it costs a lot to shift to a new system, but others may have chosen to do that. We also want to direct the PRISM Federal Users Group to explore this opportunity further. And if they believe that there's a there and they want to really look into it further, then to talk to CompuSearch and ask them if and how they might be able to activate this capability. We'd love to see integration of this information and automation of the inclusion of clauses into RFPs piloted by one particular agency. And we did shop this idea around back in 2016. It was a very different time in 2016, and there was a lot less interest in this. And so we couldn't get an agency to pick this up and run with it. The big reason being, one, they had a lot of other priorities. This wasn't a high priority of the administration at that point. And two, there was concern about, would the API cause problems to the overall contract writing system? And how could they be sure that there wouldn't be an issue that could come up with implementing the API in the systems? So there's a need to just figure out how to do a pilot that will really help to further test this opportunity. And post-pilot, we want to make sure to share lessons learned, of course, across the government and expand to other agencies. And then another thing that we found is that at least in 2015, this could be different now, a lot of RFP writers were just cutting and pasting stuff and sticking it in the RFP, and they weren't writing the RFP through the entire contract writing system. So some of those opportunities to have the system ask questions that could then result in getting a direct clause included into the contract and have that automation happen wasn't taking place and wouldn't be possible in that kind of approach, that cut and paste approach. So we need to also kind of look at how are RFP writers really using these systems, and is there a way to influence that to take advantage of automation more? And then, of course, we want to make sure we're coordinating with the planned updates to the FAR requirements in that FAR case 2022-006. So next slide, please. I think we're done. Really looking forward to the conversation, and thanks again for this opportunity to bring these ideas to you.
Questions from the group? Stephen?
So I have a million questions, which I won't go into today, but given the group today, what I'd love to hear are your observations about workforce familiarity, workforce openness, and basically what, if anything, this group might be able to do to accelerate that. And keep in mind, we talked to Jeff and others about this, but we're not FAI, we're not DAU, and at least in my experience in our early meetings, a fair number in our community have been a little bit taken aback by how little familiarity the workforce, big W workforce, has, and how steep the learning curve is. So, in this context, I'd love to hear some thoughts about how what you're doing gets translated. So I assume, right, you get one contract manager for best in class contract. That's a little bit easier, right?
Absolutely.
What about the other 15,000?
Yeah. Holly, you want to start, or should I? I think it's a great question. Holly, you want me to start?
Well, Steve, was that a question you're asking us, or did you want the group to talk about that? I mean, I know Stephen and I have thoughts, but I want to also make sure we hear from your group as well.
I'm posing it as a question, but I defer to you all as to how you respond or deflect.
I'm happy to toss out a thought or two on it. When you're dealing with such a large workforce and such a large number of contracts, and such a diversity of agencies and programs, that you can't really train your way out of this problem by itself. You have to, I think, you have to have a system so that the sustainability is the default wherever you wherever you can, and where it's not the default, it is it's as easy and intuitive as possible, or you're just not going to get to the compliance that we're all after here. That's just if you had a UX expert look at this, a user experience person who looked at all this, they would, I think that's what they would say. I'm not a UX person. I've done a little bit of coursework and talked to people on that, but you can't train your way out of this problem alone. The training should be, icing on the cake. I think that's my 2 cents.
So
Holly.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Stephen. And I mean, that's what's exciting about getting to focus on the best in class contracts and make sure they truly are best in class. And, it's time to do that work now. So we're hoping that that's really going to create a model that then can be utilized and can ripple through the rest of the contracting community. And that we can sort of get people used to and comfortable with these clauses. And with sustainability as a topic being incorporated in a way that just makes this easier across the board through the sustainability check effort. But we also really need to automate selection of RFPs in that, or selection of clauses and incorporation into our RFPs from the beginning of the process as well.
Your approach seems so consistent with what we've been talking about as areas of focus, which is how do you, on the one hand, make it so easy and reduce friction that it's, and that tends to lean towards the automation, the technology. And then the second piece is sort of how do you train, and is that a certification? And what I love about your approach in best in class is it's super targeted, and yet it's targeting big chunks of spend. So you're working with a small group of leaders who manage a large amount of money. And so lower effort, huge impact. Not to say it's a low effort, really.
Yeah, relatively speaking.
In perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking aloud about, the category managers have teams under them, always other duties as assigned, but fairly large teams. And I'm wondering if we think through, have you observed that these teams may be a place to start for the training focal areas, not just the leaders, but the actual teams underneath them? Are they in need of sort of comprehensive training and understanding? And if we do a certification, maybe that's where you start with some of these category teams, just to test it out. Within GSA manages many of the categories. So I like the synergy between, we focus on GSA, we focus on some of the categories. So just a thought, I don't mean to get too tactical, but question. In your experience working with the category teams and the acquisition workforce generally, it's a broad group of people. You have acquisition lawyers, you have the acquisition professionals, you have program managers, so is there a specific group where you feel like, boy, if we could only crack that nut, it would advance us so far along? Like the lawyers, let's pick on Steve. The lawyers, if we could only, empower them and have them understand this, that we'd make significant headway.
Yeah, I mean, I think the solution managers and the category management team leads are really critical in all of this. And maybe having, or one or 2 day training for them, I think would really make a big impact, and potentially do sort of category management specific training so that there could really be an opportunity to have conversations really specific to the product and service category that they're focused on, because there is variation in the kinds of things they need to be thinking about based on what product or service they're trying to help us buy. And really getting, all the big solution managers together to have that conversation. I think that would be really helpful, in getting the sustainability leads in the federal government to be part of that, because there's not a place where that happens right now. And we really need to create those spaces where that conversation happens directly. And I think doing that would really be helpful.
I think that makes sense because Steve was like, forget the lawyers, focus on the leaders. And I agree with that. Like, and the leaders are all encompassing and represent the entire acquisition workforce and the end-to-end success of that category. And so, yeah, it's super exciting what you're doing.
Thank you. I think you played a significant role in the green check, the precursor. To all
yeah,
this.
but you guys have taken it far beyond, so it's impressive.
I think another thing. Go on.
I don't want to hide it, but can we go back for a moment to the point that Holly just made about creating that space? I mean, when I think about easy recommendations, maybe one of the other subcommittees can make for us to hear from you that that's not happening feels like an elephant in the room thing to me. So, and again, I don't want to put too much pressure here, but if you could describe in a sentence or two, now or later in an email, what that might look like. And I'm thinking back to, we used to have the frontline forum of contracting officers, right? I mean, this is the way that governments manage change. This is a change management problem. So anyway, I apologize for interrupting, but that point felt like a really big one. If we could get anything on that from you, I'd be really grateful.
Okay, happy to do that. I mean, I can give you an example, like in the federal IT space, because I'm our lead on IT sustainability. And so I've been co-chairing this federal IT sustainability working group for several years. And it's really a composition of all of the people who are responsible for ensuring that we're procuring, using, and disposing IT sustainably in the federal government. Well, most of those people are the sustainability people in the sustainability shops of their agencies. Sometimes it's the property management people, sometimes they're in the compliance office, but they're not usually in the CIO office, and they're not usually in our Office of Mission Support, is what we call it at EPA, the folks who buy the stuff, So we really need to talk to those people, and we just got made into a working group under the CIO Council, and it took years for that to happen, and it was completely by happenstance that happened. But we've now made that connection, and that's really been very helpful to broadening that conversation and increasing that connection. But we still don't have always that acquisition element in those conversations. So we need to do it with all the key things we buy, for sure.
And I'm going to beg you to follow up on that, because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this is something that Jeff can start the wheels on by himself. I mean, we don't need a lot of machinery on that.
Awesome.
I think one of the things about your presentation that really has struck me is this notion that there's a lot of discretion that takes place based on what information a different procurement officer is managing. That discretion is necessarily causing low compliance, right, with sustainability. So you're asking questions related to how's there a way to operate at a higher level to remove that discretion so that each of the different RFPs that go through sam.gov have already passed the threshold of expectations.
Exactly.
If we're talking about the drop dead easy, the potential huge impact levers to pull, which this committee is somewhat tasked with, it is our second priority, looking at critical levers and tools to empower the acquisition workforce to embed sustainability. It seems that this is a pretty significant one we should pay attention to.
So can I riff on that idea, Nicole? So as Holly mentioned, the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories folks produce some kind of software that would scan these RFPs for sustainability language, just I think FEMP and Energy Star. But one could imagine, particularly if and when the sustainability requirements of the federal government are, instead of across 25, 30 different FAR requirements, they're down to say one. One could imagine a little software that would, a piece of software that would go into sam.gov that would just scan for that little chunk of text, Yes or no, does it have it? If not, I'm sorry, but it doesn't get posted to sam.gov until you include this little piece of text. Or check a box saying it doesn't apply. This is, a special case, it's an aircraft carrier, whatever it is, and then it becomes the default, at least in terms of what is required of vendors contractually. That's not the whole problem, but that's a huge chunk of it. The next phase, of course, is ensuring that vendors, meet their legal requirement in such a contract. So, I don't know. That's just I was just riffing on your thought, Nicole. So.
Yeah, and we do have, as far as a scanning tool, to your point, Stephen, IRS has built a tool called Doc Scout, and they're utilizing it to automate review of various contracts and RFPs to make sure that they include particular clauses. They have already said that they would be willing and are interested in expanding that to cover all the sustainability clauses. So there is an opportunity to potentially use that tool. They of course need money in order to do that. But that is another opportunity area. Either you can do both. You can automate the inclusion in the RFP and the contract writing system, or you let all of RFPs be built however you want to have them be built. And then you can have them scanned after they've been written to determine if they include the clauses before they go on sam.gov or as they're being put onto sam.gov. So opportunities there as well. Thanks for pointing that out.
Kristen has her hand up, and then I see a couple of items in the chat I think we should get to if we have time. Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, and I have jurisdictional scope creep here because, I chair the Industry Partnership Subcommittee. So I too was struck by Nicole, the lack of compliance. And my thought was, if we had full compliance, what is the potentially unintended consequence of restricting the supplier pool? Like I can't even imagine if we had full, and that's one of the things we're looking at. And I don't know if it's a reality, but I think some of the perception amongst the need for the level of discretion people are given is to ensure that, the supplier pool stays resilient and broad and diverse. We can make the small business goals. So, as we think about automation and things, there's a bit of a math equation here with constraints. And so I just bring it up as a thought. And do you find in some of your exploration have you learned anything about why the compliance is low? Like, is there a perception that it's not needed, or is it just that the workload is so heavy they can't handle it? Like, I think that's an important question for us to get some insight on.
Yeah, we did some analysis in our team several years back about what federal perceptions were about sustainability requirements in general. And I think the Federal Energy Management Program has delved into that more too, and probably a little more targeted related to, why don't you have this clause in your RFP we just reviewed, which might be even more helpful analysis to take a look at. So I'm happy to reach to Chris Payne at NREL and ask him if he has the most updated kind of input they received as part of their focus groups that they did, and share that with this group. That's helpful.
Yeah, two thoughts. Two thoughts in response to Kristen's questions. Number one is there are so many different places, I think, where the federal procurement professional might go in terms of websites for resources and information. I know that there's a big effort, I think, to make the Acquisition Gateway the definitive resource. If that were the definitive resource today, and every procurement person knew that's where you go for every question you have, what sustainability language should I include in this contract? You go to a certain place and on the Acquisition Gateway, I think that would go a long way. But I think people are going to many different websites and resources and so forth. That's one thing. On your other point about reducing the supply pool, a bunch of years ago, the question came up, like, could small vendors possibly meet all these sustainability requirements? And I went out and reached out to a whole bunch of different eco labels and sustainability standard developers saying, do you have any data on the types of companies that are meeting your requirements, and and anything about the size of the businesses? And I think all of us that looked at this were surprised that a very large percentage of the companies that were qualifying for Green Seal or any number of UL sustainability standards and requirements and so forth and so on were small businesses as defined by SBA. I imagine that data is still true, but I think there's a bit of a myth out there. It's just a large company's game. It's not a large company's game for the most part. I'm sure there are certain eco labels where it is a large company or certain product categories, but overall, from the data we collected, not at all. It's small vendors do qualify in large numbers.
That'd be great. I don't know if you still have access to any of that data. I'd love to get it for some discussion
Sure.
on the other subcommittee. But I agree with you. How much of it is fact and how much of it is urban legend? And how much pressure do these procurement specialists feel, acquisition professionals, all these different conflicting pressures, and how is that influencing them? So
yeah, well, certainly in the category management world, Holly and I have sat in on some of those discussions. It's about cost, reducing cost. It's also about increasing small business participation, and just seems like those two keep coming up again and again. And I think there's so much work to be done in just those two alone. That sustainability becomes sort of like, a distant third, fourth, fifth tier thing. But, if you made it more of the default, and maybe, who knows, if it's in performance, I don't know, somebody's performance requirements, as, contracting officers or what have you, maybe that would be a factor. I don't know.
yeah, great. Thank you. Great comments. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not sure if. No, okay. You might want to put your on mute. Well, anyway, if we don't have any additional questions for our guest speakers, we thank you so much. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we hope that you might be willing to come back and discuss with us some of our recommendations and findings, and maybe even help us refine them. We'd truly appreciate that. Boris, I'm going to turn this over to you to adjourn our meeting, and we can move forward unless there are any final questions from the public. I know we've made some space for that.
Yeah, and actually I was going to bring Troy in. Troy, if you wanted to add anything else here before we close the meeting, give you an opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Boris. Well, I just say this is another outstanding discussion. Holly, Stephen, thank you so much. We're, I think, in awe of all the really great work that's already going on across the government, and we want to make sure that all our different subcommittees and the full committee of the GAP-FAC really harness that and help spread it as best as possible. So thank you both for adding to the discussion here. I think maybe one takeaway that I'm pulling from this and other meetings is that, and I know you've called this out before, is that maybe like just jumping to the idea of training is not always the easiest solution. We want the workforce to be trained, but if there are ways that we can shortcut things and take some things off their plate, that is just definitely just food for thought for this subcommittee and the full committee. So I appreciate everything we heard today that kind of leads us in that direction, and agree with Daryl and Nicole that we'll probably want to have you back, Holly and Stephen. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity and the work of this committee and the larger committee as well. Really important to hear from all of you and get your wisdom and thoughts on what we can be doing to further improve federal sustainable procurement. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you both. And I
Thank you,
also want to
guys.
thank Jenny Romer for, she's a member of our GAFAC, and thank you, Jenny, for supporting these awesome presentations this afternoon. So we've got a lot here. I don't know if you want to say any words just before we close.
No, I'm very lucky to have Holly and Stephen as part of our team. So thanks so much for sharing this.
Thank you.
Great. So you all, thank you again for our fourth meeting. We're closing it. Now we're going to post a recording of this meeting along with the presentations. And then we're going to be doing lots of work here. But I appreciate all of you coming in, and Nicole, you can stick around for a little bit. We're gonna go ahead and close off. So this meeting is adjourned.
Yeah.